In this video I'm going to model a sword. It's quite a common prop that people will make for games, and this one's quite a simple structure, and so there's 4 parts to it. It has the pommel at the top, and so that's a metallic cylinder with rounded off edges, so we'll look at bevels for that. The handle is a much more simple cylinder, but it's been shaped to work with this. Similarly, the guard here is a cylinder, again shaped to fit, and the blade, which is made from a cube and shaped to look like a broadsword. So I do have some criticisms of this. I think the size of the blade isn't matched by the size of the handle, so I think that's something. The handle should have been a bit longer, a bit wider, so it could be held in 2 hands. This is kind of like 1 hand size, so I would work on that to improve it. But what I'm going to do to start with, I'm just going to move these objects to the side, and I'm going to start another one next to this. We can then reference some of what we've done already in this. Now it's flying off in different directions because that's not centered, so I'm going to group this before I do that. So Apple G or Control G, we'll put that into a group. Now I quite often combine rather than group, but in this instance, if I move the group, they will stay together. I can't actually select that group unless I select it from the outliner, and if you haven't got the outliner window, you need to go to Windows, Outliner, and then that will show up as a panel. You can select the individual parts of it though, but it will be, as you can see, that's shaded slightly differently, and we can see the group in the outliner there. I've only selected the blade. Right, looking at the blade, we can see the attributes. I'm in the modeling standard, so I've got the modeling toolkit and attribute editor. I've got the modeling menu set. So from here, the menu set is all about modeling. These ones are NURB surfaces, which we're not going to use, and then UVs and other things beyond that. So to start with, this is a cube on the blade. The attribute editor allows me to see how I set this up. So that's the bevel. I'm looking for the Polycube 3 node here. And I can see that I gave it a thin width, 0.5 of a centimeter, 2 centimeters deep, so that's the width, but it's actually been adjusted since then, and a height of 80 centimeters. Subdivisions in the width, not the height, so I've given subdivisions there, and that has allowed me to work up these areas here. If I switch it to component node and select some of these vertices, my computer is a little slow, it doesn't react as I would expect it, but so we've got a point and a thin part to the blade as we come around there. So that's been done partly using these the setup as we've done, as I was saying, with the segments, but also if I look back, I can see I've got a poly bevel on there, which will actually give me these segments that I've worked with. So I'm going to go back to the start. I am going to start with a blade, and there's a cube, so I'm just going to emulate what I had before. 0.5 width, a height of 80, and a depth of 2. So that's giving me the cube there. If I have subdivisions in the width and the depth, then that will give me the ability to create the elements that I need. So I can now just focus on it to start with. Because it's quite a long object, I need to get in quite close to a segment of it to start working with this. Now I may do this differently to how I did it previously, but if I go into edge mode, I can select the edges that I want to work with. So the actual this is going to be the edge of the blade, and we've got one on each side. Now we could just move these, but if we want to do them both evenly and get a symmetrical look, it's much better to use the scale tool. Scale tool you can get on the shortcut as R, but I can actually just scale this out in that dimension there, and that gives us a kind of a wider blade, hence the name broadsword, and that looks fairly good for this. And then I'm going to turn it so I can get to the end. Now if I turn it when I'm not quite in the right spot, I'm just going to roll out. I will be inside the sword blade. And then for this part, I want to change to vertex mode. I'm going to take this centered vertex here. I'm going to press F on the keyboard, but I wanted to get the angle before I did that, so I can actually move that directly up. So I'm going to use the move tool, which is W on the keyboard, and just push that out into a sharp point. So that's the bit that makes the point there. The good thing about this method is that I am keeping the geometry very clean. There's it looks like a triangle, but it's actually a quad. So we've got these 4 edges per segment of face. If you can keep quads on your modeling, it's well worth doing. We'll see when we look at booleans that is essential in some cases. I can slightly shape these as well, so I'm going to just take these end vertices. If I just check both sides, I can bring that down slightly to give it a kind of sharper point. To get a slightly sharper look to that edge of the blade, I'm going to go to edges again. So remembered my selection and take those edges there. But I'm going to use a bevel function just to give me a bit more geometry around that. It kind of smooths it off within that, and it's also giving me a kind of a sharp arrowhead at the top, which I didn't really want, but that's fine for me. At the moment I'm just going to put in 2 segments there, a very slight depth, and then go back in and really sort of focus in on that edge, and I can bring the 2 or make this a lot sharper. I just want to make that really thin, so the thinner the blade, the sharper it is. So I'm going to actually drag these ones back so that there is a really strong feeling of sharpness, because I've got that there. I can bring that in to the center and then squash that, scale it probably about half. So I've kind of taken that slider to about halfway, so that's really giving me a kind of razor sharp edge to it, but the body of the sword is a bit thicker, so that works for that as well. I also need to just sort out the top, this arrowhead. As I said, I would do work differently in different circumstances, and perhaps bringing these vertices down slightly, it's possibly not the best plan. So I'm just going to have to sort out my error on that, and I'll just bring these out to beyond that, and then have another proper look at the vertices at the top. So I can see I just made that slightly messy by bringing those down. You can see that edge vertice has come higher than the other, so it's overlapping. It's very messy. So I'm just going to bring that up within that geometry there. I've actually caused a triangulated aspect there. It's slightly more messy than I wanted, but actually it'd probably work out okay if I bring that up and also scale those together. I can actually make it quite a vicious looking edge, or I could just have it more regular, so you could have it quite sharp like that. Yeah, it depends on the blade you're working for. So it's obviously we're making stylized objects, and I want this one to be slightly more memorable, and partly the blade can do that. So if I take this back to look at the whole thing as one blade, I can also see that probably it should taper towards the top. So if I select these vertices, if I just check around, I'm going to press F on the keyboard to focus on them. I can check around the back. So what I want to do in this instance is turn my camera based selection off, because it's not selecting the vertices in the background. So in one of my other videos, when I was making a cup or a mug, I wanted just to select the faces on one side, but in this case I want to select everything on all sides. Just bring that in to taper it, and that actually helps with the sharpness of that point. So as I bring that down, that's slightly more realistic. Okay, so I think I'm working on this upside down. Spun the whole thing around. So it's a different type of point. It's kind of to the blade I did previously, but you can get creative with that. And what I am going to do in this case, just bring that down to the 0 level. Bring that down to the origin, and that just helps me when I bring in the next aspects. So we're going to have a join on this. So I want to be able to cover this with where the guards are, and that just makes it neat. So there's only 3 more cylinders to put on, so I can add those in fairly quickly. Before I do that, I will put a name on the blade, and then I can start making the cylinders that I'm going to start working with now. So I'll just focus on that one. So I'm going to rotate this around the x-axis, this red one. You can see the x, y, z down here, so I know which one it is. And the rotation, so we've got translate, which is move, rotate and scale. So I'm going to rotate 90 degrees on the x-axis. You can also start looking at the parameters for this as well. I can give it greater height. Press enter. I'm just going to press F on this so I can see how high that's gone. And then we're going to add subdivisions in the height as well, so we can just raise that until we feel we've got enough. So the original piece had a kind of bobble on the end, and then was thinner, so that kind of tapered down, then a bit of body, and then some more. So I'm actually going to give 12 to this just to make sure I've got enough. Then I'll look at the whole thing just to make sure I'm getting the right scale. So there's wide enough, I think, for what I need. And then it's a matter of getting these into the right position, these edge loops. So again, I select edges and I can double click an edge loop to select it. And I'm going to try using the scale tool just to move these around as well. So to push these further to the end, I can scale those two edges to make that a bit thinner. Similarly with the next one, because I want to make sure the metal is effective but not overly dominant. So we want to have some thin parts and some thicker parts. So I've selected both of these nodes now, and I'm just going to shrink them using the middle scale tool. And you can see that that's actually pulling towards the center slightly. So I'm doing all dimensions with that, but I can actually scale that out that way slightly as well. So I wanted to be strong about where it connects to the blade, and then I just want to do some more work on this one. I mean, these have to withstand pretty hefty blows, so actually I've missed that one. So if I double click on the edge loop, I get the right one, hold down shift, double click on the next one, and I can bring that scale over there. Again, scale it right down. I want that to be very thin. So it's kind of in a single dimension, like that. That probably makes it too thin in one axis. But I'll have a look at that. So that's fairly good. I'm doing some by eye, so it's not going to be perfectly symmetrical, but I just do want that to be thinner around that part. And then again, I want this bit to taper, so I can just scale this, and I can do this with a uniform scale. So the centerpiece is the uniform scale, and we'll bring that in around here to the edges of the blade. So that will hide the blade, or where it joins the blade, and that'll be in the center of that there. So it is a bit solid, a bit thick, so I will double click both edge loops around the end of this cylinder, and on that I will add a bevel. I'm also contemplating making it slightly smaller. I mean, you will just end up tweaking this constantly. So I want a smaller depth, so 0.5, and probably more segments. No, segments is positive. Let's say 4. Actually, I've lost that, so I'm going to do that one again. 4 segments. Fraction is how deep that goes, or how far along that goes. So I'm going to bring that down by double clicking it and retyping it. My mouse isn't behaving very well. There you go. So okay, so I've got that, and I've got the smooth. I was pressing the numbers, so it's actually giving me the smooth preview on that already. So I think that's quite stylized. I think we've got a reasonable look with that. The handle cylinder should be the easiest part for us, so I'm just going to rename these as I go. God, it's actually let me name it the same because that one's in a group, and this one's going to be handle. Again, back to the attributes. This third node in will allow me to raise the height, raise the radius, and 20 centimeters is possible. 20 centimeters is fine. That's probably about right for a two-handed sword. And then I will just by hand move this one above where the guard comes in. So if I look at those two pieces together, I'll just focus on that. You can see I've got a much better scale to that handle than I do on this one. Just go back in, not in object mode at the moment, I'm on edge mode still. So I lastly just want to add subdivisions so I can get some roundedness on this object. And here I'm going to use something called soft selection. So I want this to kind of get more slightly rounded or have a rounded feel, so I can select something in a soft way. The curve will give a drop off, and you have a volume on how much of the object will be selected. You kind of understand when I show you. So this base object here, so I've selected the edge loop, so I'll do it on the top bit first. Double click that and it comes up yellow. So I've got an orange line around the ring that I've selected, and then just do this base one here. If I turn soft selection on, it has yellow going into red, and that means if I change these edges, these other ones will also be influenced, but less so as it tapers into orange, red, and then in the middle it won't have any influence. You can change how much this influence works by changing this number here. It's going to give me less influence higher up. I'm going to give it 8, so I do want that to show up. And then I'm just going to scale the bottom part of that so it just disappears into the guard there a little bit more neatly. So you kind of got that working there. Also on the top where I'm going to have the pommel coming in, I'm going to want that to hide. So I do want the others to kind of work with it, but I'll taper that off. It's starting to look okay. I think the handle's probably, just worried it's a bit wide, but I will work with that for now. And then finally the cylinder for the pommel, I'll just scale that by hand and move it to the top. Okay, so it disappears in the middle there, but as it comes out the top, I should be able to make that fit with the rest of the piece. So I can actually just expand that out. See the way it tapers, it should allow it to just join through in a reasonably neat way. The more I scale it, the more I can kind of see the different edge parts to that. So I'll put it about there. And so finally I just want to do another bevel on the top of this as well. So I'll take edges on this, double click around the top of this, and I don't need soft selection on, it probably won't make any difference, but I will apply bevel to that. Now I really want that to be nicely rounded, so I'm going to, it's 3 segments, and that's probably about right. If I change the depth, it kind of lowers it slightly. That gives it, again, I think my number pad's not working. I'll give it the depth of 1 again. That's it. So that's the metal at the end of the handle. So these are all the shapes we've done. Now if I go back to the original design that I did prior to doing the demo, I have got textures on there. So I've got some pre-made textures, and I'll just apply those and then talk through them. So if I right click, assign existing material, I've got handle, which is done with a Stingray PBS, and I can look at the attributes of that from this object in the attribute editor. And this is really using a base color, no color maps, and giving it some roughness, no metallic. So I may want to do something slightly different. This one here, existing material, we have, I'll give it the blade. There's a Stingray as well. So that's a PBS texture that should translate into Unity. But for the actual blade itself, I've selected a texture that I'm using. This is from wildtextures.com, and it's a brushed metal. If I just download that and have a look at it, you can see it's just got a bit more contrast in the metal on that one. So I kind of wanted a more contrasty blade. So if I just set that one up, existing material, and this one uses a blin. In fact, I can go through the steps of doing that. So if I right click, assign new material. So in the previous sessions we've looked at the Stingray shader, but in this one, if we just use as favorites, Blinn and Lambert are the main two that I would use if I wasn't using the PBS shaders. So Blinn is shiny, Lambert's matte. So with this one, I'm just selecting the Blinn, and I would call this blade Blinn 2. And so then I'm attaching a color file to it, and this will be the image file that I've previously downloaded and put into my source images folder, and I can open that there and that shows up. So I can see that's got a, well, you see it better in Unity actually, but you'll see that that's got a kind of a brush look. There is contrast on it, and depending on what you're working on, it is useful to work with textures as well. And that's it. That's a fairly standard way of modeling a sword as a first prop.